All right, was going to take a few minutes to demo how to get IIS, Internet Information Services, installed in a Windows server. What that does is make your server capable of delivering web pages. So in the Windows environment, they call that set of services IIS, and then it gives you a configuration utility to manage how web pages go out. Now this doesn't hook it necessarily to the World Wide Web. You would still need if you had a server, to make an arrangement with an ISP to have things come to your IP, and that later we'll use Azure Cloud Services to let Microsoft give us access. But this will just install that basic infrastructure to get going. I'll try to kind of follow what I've asked you to do here. But always double check what I asked you to do. Sometimes when I'm in the middle of it, I name something different and like that. So there's demo and then what you're supposed to do. Always read what you're supposed to do, right? Well, good. So we're going to install this thing called IIS. So here I am in my server. It's important that you be not logged in as test user, be logged in as probably your login that has administrator credentials, or the built-in administrator, which you probably established a password for. A couple of things before, let me just, excuse me a moment. Okay, sorry about that, even though it wasn't a second for you, I just paused the recording. I took a little break. So I'm here in the our server, and before we get started, I want to show a couple of things that don't happen. If I go into File Explorer, the file system, and look at the C drive on the server, notice there's not a folder called inetpub. That folder is the default that gets built by IIS to hold web-related stuff. You can configure it to be a different folder, but we'll start off using that configuration folder. And if I come over here into Internet Explorer, and I'm doing all this in the VM, right, on the server. Let's wait for it. If I go and try to get to this site called localhost, nothing happens, right? Because so localhost, by the way, is, and it's the same on a Linux server, is give me the web server that I am locally logged into, meaning this server. Sometimes you can get to an IP address. How real web pages work. The IP address is hooked up to a big central domain lookup, and they get it that way. But localhost just says, well, give me the server give me the web server that's on the thing that I'm located on. So a couple of things that aren't there: no inetpub, localhost doesn't work. I'll close that. Didn't really need to close it. Now to get IIS in, I've clicked on the server manager, and if it came up, you can do that just from the start. I click that option that says don't have the server manager pop up every time I come in, and all that. And it's going to be a little bit like installing Active Directory. We're going to use the GUI and things. In my opinion, now this is a system admin thing. There are some purists that say you should always do everything from the command prompt scripting or the shell, because that's how you really learn how the commands work. Now, for something like adding a user to Active Directory, I might agree. You should know how to do that, because you're going to do that hundreds and thousands of times in the life of the server, making backups, working with directories, etc. You need to know how to do that at the command line so you can write scripts to automate it. Installing Active Directory or installing IIS, which might happen once in the lifetime of a server, not so. But you could do this at the command line. For installing IIS, we're going to do it using the GUI. And so when we get into Server Explorer, I've clicked Add Roles and Features. You get kind of this disclaimer. By the way, if you wanted to get rid of some features, this is how you do it. Some of you misnamed your domain, so don't change it and call it VirtualNet. I think about the easiest way, if you do that at the start, is to take out Active Directory and put it back in. But don't do that. Only go back here if you do something wrong. And look at, this is something that several of us, and I think I hid it away in the thing, that a built-in administrator account needs a strong password. Some of you found that out the hard way, or okay, it wasn't working, and I think I tucked it in somewhere in a video. Maybe it bypassed. But we're all good, so I'm just going to click next. Sometimes you just say, oh, well, you just click next, and that's the thing. But realize every time you get one of these dialogues, there's some reason why it's asking, but we're going to do a feature installation on this particular server that is the only server we have in our pool. And the thing that we're going to do, so that's really isn't hard, is, we want web server. And it's going to say, oh, I'm going to install some management tools. We want those. They do give us a GUI that lets us manipulate things. Later we'll look at script that lets us manipulate things. Setting up websites for users is something we're going to script. Pardon me, I got a tickle in my throat. So yes, keep the tools, do add features. That wasn't so hard. So one click web server. If I kind of look down the menu, we're going to go through some features that we could have added, and you can do more than one thing at once. Like I think later we might need .NET Framework 3.5, but I like to try to keep it to do one thing at a time through Network Server. So if it fails, I don't have to figure out, okay, those two things work, that one thing didn't work. So we don't need to add any features. We just did the server role, but we are going to need some role services. Okay, so I've kind of clicked next a couple of times. Now I'm on role services. So a web server can do a lot of things. This is HTTP is the protocol that web pages go over, and this says, and we're not going to change any of this, but we're going to allow static content and something called a default document. We'll be looking at that. We'll log HTTP, not do any other logging. We're going to leave everything as it is, but change two things. Down in security, I'm going to ask you to install basic authentication and Windows authentication. Most web pages are delivered anonymously, meaning when somebody lands at the site, that page gets served up. You might say, oh, I log in all the time at Amazon and D2L, but that login isn't so much part of the web server doing anything. That's software that the web server is responding to that handles those logins. But you can have the web server wait in Windows, and for that matter Linux, and the web server says, I need to have this person know now about this person at the web server level, and we'll see how that works in a little bit. But to make that work, that'll be coming in the next assignment, you need to have basic authentication and Windows authentication. You might have heard of FTP, File Transfer Protocol. If we wanted that, then it's not a bad thing, and people can then push files in and take files out. We're not going to do it. So the only thing we changed then in role services is added basic and Windows authentication. So I'm going to go next. I always like to, for me, click this restart, if it does need a restart, because some of these processes are long. I think this is like 5 minutes, but if it needs to restart 3 times and I'm off getting a cup of coffee, or I've minimized this and I'm doing something else, so that'd be my recommendation, that we just do install. It'll do, the starting installation and do what it is. We could even close this whole wizard. I kind of just like to leave it up there because it's what I did. But I am going to, stop the recording and come back when there's something to see. All right, so I'll see you all in what will be a few minutes for me and a few seconds for you. All right. So I kind of waited a while, did a couple of things. Installation succeeded. I have never had this thing fail. As long as you get that administrator with a good password, I guess something could happen, especially if you fiddled around in your server, and why would you have and done things that I haven't done. So the first thing to do if you do get an error is Bing it or Google it if you must. Always maybe look up the exact wording in the error message. Several of you, as I had mentioned, had the administrator strong password thing. And the reason I knew the answer to that wasn't because my mama told me growing up that, oh, this needs to happen. It's because I ran into it too. In fact, I ran into it when I was kind of having a class. And sometimes when you install, you become that administrator and it doesn't happen. Other times when you install, like we did, you have an account and there's this built-in administrator you might not know's there. I guess I'm getting around. I'm not smarter. I just had I got smashed in the face once and figured out how to get out. And so sometimes, just especially if you can kind of copy, the text is there or something, or just go in the window and type that exact error message. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 pages and you can get it. But so my first suggestion is maybe look for the error and then always reach out to me. If you do get problems with this or anything, gosh, a screen tap remind me your AIST2330. Just help me out. Just say, oh, gee, I had a problem. I don't know what to do. That's very hard for me to react to. Okay, but feature installation succeeded, and so I'm going to close. Well, here I am in local disk C, and as advertised, we now have this thing called INET pub. So that got put out there. I'll come back to that. If I come out here and say, let me see, localhost. There's something there now. Before it said, it just said, oh, there is no page. So our server is now so the server computer operating system now includes a set of services that turn it into a web server. I'm going to bring up one more thing. It is another GUI. I'm coming over here to, I call it Tile World. And if you start typing out IIS, you'll get Internet Information Services Manager. And I'm going to right click and run as administrator. I don't know if that's always necessary. It's a good habit when you're doing these installing kinds of things. Just it does give you a little bit more authority to move around and get things done. Excuse me, thought I had a sneeze. All right, yeah, kind of battling a cold. Okay, so let's look in Internet Information Services. And I'm coming down, opened it up. There's our server name, and there's sites, and there's a default site. Okay. Excuse me. And in the default site, the features include default document. So over here are a list of files that when something is requested from the root of our particular web server, which has for us this name localhost, it's going to look in its root folder. We'll get to that. For first this file, then that file, then that file, then that file, then that file. And if it finds any of them, or as soon as it finds one, that's what it'll display. So I'm going back to the idea that for some reason this popped up. And it's not because necessarily Internet Information Services has popped that thing up. Coming over here to my file system, I'm looking at C. If I dive into this folder that we got, INETPub, that was put out there for Internet Publishing. Okay, that's it. And this www root folder that's in INETPub has the is where when somebody says I want localhost, or I want that name, that domain name, or that IP address, if it's hooked into the World Wide Web, then that's where the files get delivered from. And you can use Internet Information Services to configure that and put them in different places, but you can almost think about that the web server can't see things that are above or outside. So think of that, and I don't want to use the term firewall, or it's think of this as if you put it in www root or lower, the World Wide Web can see it. Coming up here, no, not through a web browser. Okay, and so the fact that this particular page comes up here is really because it looked for each of those folders: default HTML, default HTML. If you remember from IIS, the last thing on the list was IIStart or IIStart, and excuse me, there it is. I am going to, man, it's getting worse, but I'm going to go into Notepad, but I'm going to start typing Notepad, and I'm going to run that as administrator too. It turns out that the internet folder, even though, well, I'm already administrator, if you just right-click and edit that thing, there's something called user account control that kind of comes up above, but think of this as going to an elevated level of privilege. I'm going to do File, Open, and I'm just going to get into, this is not something you have to do, this is something that I am using to go here because it's looking for text files. I'm going to bring IIStart HTML in to Notepad. So HTML, it's short for HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. If you had web, the web development class, then you know about it. You might know about it just through life or high school. But what you should know about HTML, like so many things that we do on computers, it's a text file. It's a text file that has description, commands, code, script. In this case, it's called a markup language that when that text file is looked at by the appropriate kind of program, in the case of HTML, that appropriate program is a browser, something will happen. So notice there's no blue pictures in here. There's no, not too much of anything. There is this title, IIS Windows Server, and that's why IIS Windows Server came here. All right, so you can work in here. I'm not going to. Now, let's talk about tag formats a little. Yeah, so this is the tag that says, in the brace, this is where the header begins, and this is where the header ends. And so tag format, think of it as categories, and within header there is a tag called style that has some parameters about how things might be styled. And then here's, the body begins, and we have a div that is like an area within the body. What I'm going to do is Todd was here and saved it. Now, if you get an error when you save it, it might have been you didn't start Notepad with admin privilege. If it says, you don't have the authority to do this, and you might say, even though I'm an administrator, remember I started Notepad with the admin privilege. You might say, well, that didn't change this. The thing about a web page is you have to refresh it, because the web page got delivered. How did I get off of it? Darn it. I don't know how I did that. Maybe fat fingered it. You have to refresh it, because the way a web server works, when somebody requests a page, it goes down the line and it sits there. And if somebody changes the page on the server, unless they've written some very fancy kind of advanced code, that doesn't get propagated down the line. It just sits there. So I had to refresh, but what I wanted to demonstrate was that, in fact, it's this file stored in that folder that is driving what appears on the web page. So we've got a great start to seeing how all this works. So this, a lot of the tricky stuff is done by IIS, and we let it happen. If we look back at the kind of thing I've asked you to do, so blah, 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 basic, and so we talked about that. Well, we talked about Nano in class. I was using Notepad. So we're supposed to create an HTML page, okay? And it's going to say something like, welcome visitors to the website, your name, and link back to our class, okay? And then we want that page to come up automatically if somebody visits the website. And then you're going to get a couple of screen caps and turn stuff in. Okay, so good. Let's talk about making a basic web page. So I'm now back in the VM, starting up Notepad. And again, if we're going to save in that www root folder, it's important to run this as administrator. So we can put it down there. All right, and we're going to create a basic HTML page. Now, I'm just doing it in a text editor, so, and man, I'm sorry about all this hacking. Probably best not to talk, but I wanted to get this out. But so I'm doing this in a text editor. There are a lot of HTML editors that remember about the tags, and you get a what you see is what you get. You never really see the code. But the basic tags that you need is something that says I'm beginning my HTML and I'm ending my HTML, and anything that happens in the middle is HTML. But since these are in those brackets, that doesn't render, that doesn't show on the screen. That's signals. I'm going to include a couple of other tags. This isn't the minimal HTML needed to get this done, but it is helps me to demonstrate some things. Let me all right, so the title for a web page, and here you got to be careful about making sure you write the names correctly and get the braces and the backslash. So the title begins here. The title is an element that fits within the element called head, but that'll put Todd Schultz's AIST2330 web page up in the title. And down here in, after we're done with the head, the actual page should fit in a body tag, right? So you could type this from the top to the bottom. You don't have to do body and slash body here. It's text. At the end of the day, it's what you save that matters. I do that just so I don't forget. And I tend to indent sometimes when I'm inside. And you could start typing here. I'm going to use a P tag. That means I want a paragraph, and it doesn't matter kind of where you hit the returns and everything. It will render by the browser. And I did come down to a new line for this. So one of the things you need in your web page is a link to our actual course, right? And the way you make a link is using what's called an anchor tag. And so an anchor tag takes an attribute, right? We talked about elements. Attributes are little call it settings, if you will, identifiers within a tag that identify some particular piece of information, like so I put that in double quotes. That says, oh, the hypertext reference for this tag is going to be, and that happens to be the URL of the page where we land to get all the great stuff that comes along. Now I'm going to hit this. So that kind of finishes the A tag. What goes in the A tag, that is, there is a /A that comes when I'm done with the A tag. What goes in the A tag is that bit of text. Sometimes it's called the friendly text or something. So that's the text that's going to be kind of in blue and underlined, at least as a default. You can control that format. So we're going to have something that we hope says, welcome to, don't use Todd Schultz's, please. I want your name, all right? I've had, it seems like I always get one or two that, okay, don't copy directly, we're trying to learn how to do. And very good, right? And so I was just double checking, and so this is going to be the part that gets in blue and underlined, and when I click on it, something happens, and that's because it's in an A tag, and it's this href that tells the A tag where to go and link to a page. If I want a period at that end of that sentence, I put it there, and then the paragraph ends. All right. So let's see. I gave you a particular name for this, AIST2330 home. Save as. It's important that you save it in inetpub www root on the C drive, unless you've configured your server to. I think I asked for the L on it. Yeah, it really doesn't matter. AIST2330 home HTML. Stored in here. I always like to, when I'm using Notepad, do all files so it doesn't put .txt on the end. All right. And now so I've just saved that. If I come here, and the casing doesn't matter on a Windows server. That is, I didn't have to use the capitalizing like this. On a Linux server, it does matter. All right, not the prettiest web page you'll ever see, but it does the right kinds of things. All right, yeah, so good enough, and I won't wait for that to render. But the only thing missing now, so we have a web page, and you can go to have a web development class to make those prettier. But the problem is, we want that to come up if they just ask for the server. All right, so that's easy enough. Back here, this is the IIS manager. We need to and remember how we got here was default website, default document, opened it up, and what we're going to do is add the name of that file. All right, and notice it did put it at the top. We can move it down, but we want this at the top. We want to use this before it finds this guy, right? So that's made it easy. Now if I refresh, this is what they get if they just look for the web page. Oops, and so anyway, we are taking another break. Sorry for all that clicking around, and it was just about finished and took it. So now we have done what we need, and getting the screen cap of this kind of thing. And shift print screen is always a good way to get the whole thing, but seeing that you're on localhost, oh gosh, you could really do the coup de grace for me if you got on the screen. I'm bringing up a command prompt, and you do something like, who am I? And, oops, let me get in the, that was command prompt on my local PC, however, and it said I was T. Schultz and the Guru laptop, but I want to get some idea that right, if you got a screen capture that includes this local host, your name here, I trust that this guy works. Oh, you're going to say this is text and send it to me, and this gives me some reasonable proof you're on your little VM server and you're logged in as, and it could be administrator here. Another thing that I asked you to do is to give me a copy of this, which you might need to do, and I forget, and this may not let me do this. Yeah, so you need to, you might have to just say continue there. It's kind of that's like giving an elevated privilege. To upload this into D2L, you might, changing the extension might make it unusable. Kind of had to click continue each time. That was sort of, then it elevated me briefly. Ran it as administrator. Sometimes when you load things into D2L, it doesn't like HTML, because HTML can have JavaScript. JavaScript can make the computer do things, and they would rather that not get uploaded. For somebody, a poor professor looking at an assignment and some student sent them code or something, or vice versa. An instructor sends student something active, and so if it comes in as text, it won't act like HTML, but I can still look in the inside and see that you've done it. All right, so that's pretty much how to get your web server started in a Windows 12 server operating system. All right, take care.